The cold, grey winter morning pressed against the large plate-glass window of the patisserie, but inside, the Upper East Side of Manhattan felt a world away. Warmth radiated from the polished wood floors and the low hum of an espresso machine. The air was thick with the rich, comforting aromas of gourmet coffee, melted chocolate, and buttery croissants, a stark contrast to the indifferent chill of the city outside. Behind flawless glass cases, pastries sat like jewels, each a perfect creation of sugar and flour. Well-dressed patrons conversed in low, confident tones, their lives as pristine and ordered as the delicate desserts they consumed. It was a sanctuary of abundance, a bubble of warmth and privilege, where the harsh realities of the street were merely a silent, moving picture to be observed but not felt, a backdrop to their comfortable existence. Seated at a small table for one, Eleanor Vance was the epitome of this insulated world, yet she seemed entirely separate from it. At 45, she was a magnate in the ruthless world of real estate, a woman who had taken a significant inheritance and multiplied it with a cold, sharp intellect. Her appearance was impeccable, a tailored power suit in a muted shade of grey, a single valuable pearl necklace, and hair styled with a precision that allowed no strand to fall out of place. She held her coffee cup with steady hands, but her gaze was distant, fixed on the hurried pulse of the city beyond the window. Her expression was controlled, almost vacant, as if she were constantly analyzing the world through an invisible barrier, a fortress built over decades of loss and mistrust. Then, a small movement broke through her reverie. A little boy, no older than 6, pressed his face against the cold glass, his breath fogging a small circle on the pane. He wasn't looking at the mountains of colorful macarons or the glistening tarts. His gaze, clear and unfiltered by want, was fixed directly on her. A small, smudged hand flattened against the window beside his cheek, a silent, innocent gesture of connection. His mother, a young woman with exhaustion etched into her features, gently tried to pull him back, her worn coat no match for the biting wind. The child, however, remained for a moment longer, his eyes holding Eleanor's with a purity that was both unnerving and deeply familiar. In that single, piercing look, the carefully constructed walls around Eleanor's heart began to fracture. For the first time in years, she didn't see a beggar or a problem to be ignored. She saw the raw, personified vulnerability she had felt as a teenager, suddenly orphaned and alone in a world that felt just as cold and indifferent as the sidewalk outside. As the mother, Claire, finally pulled her son, Leo, away from the glass, her own eyes met Eleanor's for a fleeting, desperate second. It was not a plea for money, but a silent cry of a mother's pain and a lioness's fierce, protective love. The silent exchange, lasting only a heartbeat, was enough. It was a crack in her emotional armor, and through it, a forgotten part of her own humanity began to stir. The impulse was foreign, a jolt of raw instinct that bypassed decades of calculated detachment. Eleanor turned from the window, her half-finished coffee forgotten, and walked with a purpose that silenced the patisserie's quiet murmur. She didn't hesitate, ordering a large assortment of pastries, several cartons of milk and warm, crusty bread, paying with a swift, impersonal tap of her card. The other patrons watched, their curiosity veiled by polite discretion, as the city's most formidable real estate magnate stepped out of the warm sanctuary and into the biting winter wind. The cold hit her like a physical blow, a stark reminder of the world she had so carefully insulated herself from. She approached the young woman and her 2 small children. The steam from the warm bag of food, a fragile cloud against the grey air. Instead of simply handing over the bag and retreating, Eleanor did something she hadn't done in years. She made herself small. She crouched down on the frigid concrete, bringing herself to eye level with Leo and his little sister, Mia. Her tailored suit scraped against the gritty sidewalk, a detail that would have horrified her just minutes before, but now seemed utterly insignificant. She offered the bag to the children, whose wide, hesitant eyes flickered from the food to their mother for permission. Claire, seeing this unexpected act of grace, finally broke. The silent tears she had been holding back streamed down her face, a torrent of exhaustion, gratitude, and profound relief. Eleanor felt an unfamiliar ache in her chest, a feeling that was not pity, but a sharp, painful empathy. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. Claire's story tumbled out, a fractured narrative of sudden, devastating loss. Her husband, a kind and hard-working man, had died from a heart attack just 3 months prior, leaving her with no savings and 2 children to raise. Her brothers-in-law, who had always viewed her with a quiet resentment, saw their opportunity. They presented her with a stack of legal documents, speaking of debts and estate settlements, in a language she couldn't comprehend. Trusting them as family, she signed everything. A week later, they arrived with an eviction notice, informing her that the house she and her husband had poured their lives into now belonged to them. They had legally stripped her of everything, leaving her and her children on the street with nothing but a few bags of clothes and the crushing weight of their betrayal. As Eleanor listened, the initial stirrings of empathy in her chest crystallized into a cold, hard fury. This was not the random cruelty of fate. This was a calculated act of predation. She saw in Claire's trembling form the same terror she had felt as a teenager, adrift in a world of lawyers and trustees who saw her not as a grieving child, but as an asset to be managed. The brothers-in-law were no different from the corporate raiders she crushed in the boardroom, preying on the vulnerable for personal gain. The story didn't just move her, it awakened a dormant, protective instinct that had been buried under years of solitude and mistrust. She wasn't just looking at a victim of circumstance. She was looking at a reflection of her own deepest fears, and she would not let this injustice stand. Still crouching on the sidewalk, surrounded by the indifferent flow of city life, Eleanor Vance made a decision that would alter the course of several lives, most notably her own. She pulled out her sleek, minimalist smartphone, its glowing screen a stark contrast to the grimy pavement. With a few taps, she was on the line with Marcus Thorne, the sharp, relentless head of her company's legal department. Her voice was low, but carried the unmistakable weight of command. "Marcus, cancel my afternoon. I'm sending you the details of a woman named Claire. Her brothers-in-law have illegally evicted her. I want you to find her, reverse this situation, and get her home back. Use every resource we have, spare no expense." She wasn't offering charity. She was declaring war, deploying the full might of her empire for a cause that had no balance sheet. Within the hour, Claire and her children were checked into a warm, comfortable suite at a residential hotel, a place so far removed from the cold streets it felt like another planet. The children, initially timid, were soon mesmerized by the simple luxury of a soft bed and a television, their faces finally losing the pinched, anxious look they had worn. Claire moved through the rooms as if in a dream, touching the clean sheets and running warm water over her hands, weeping silently. Eleanor stayed with them for a time, observing the scene with a strange sense of detachment. She had solved the immediate problem with a simple application of money and power. Yet as she left them in that safe haven, a profound disquiet settled over her. She had stepped into their lives, and she felt the terrifying, unfamiliar pull of responsibility. Later that night, alone in her sprawling penthouse overlooking the glittering expanse of Central Park, the doubts began to swarm. The cold, logical part of her brain, the part that had built her fortune, screamed that she was being a fool. Was Claire's story even true? Was this an elaborate scam designed to prey on the sympathies of the wealthy? The fear was a familiar ghost, whispering of past betrayals and the inherent transactional nature of human relationships. To care was to become vulnerable, to open herself up to the possibility of pain and loss. a wound she had spent her entire adult life trying to cauterize. For a moment, she considered calling Marcus and telling him to simply cut Claire a check and close the case. It would be cleaner, safer, and would restore the emotional fortress she had so carefully constructed. But the world does not wait for internal battles to be resolved. The next morning, Marcus informed her that Claire's brothers-in-law had been served. Their response was swift and vicious. They hired an aggressive law firm and immediately began a campaign to discredit Claire, painting her as a negligent, unstable woman who was unfit to be a mother and who had driven her husband to an early grave with her spending. They claimed the house was rightfully theirs to settle his hidden debts. The cruelty of the attack was breathtaking, a clear strategy to intimidate and exhaust Claire into submission. It's hard to fathom how people can inflict such pain on others, especially their own family, just for a little more money. If you believe that stories of quiet strength deserve to be heard, please subscribe and help us continue to share them. The external pressures mounted from her own social sphere as well. Word of her new project spread through the elite circles of Manhattan. The reactions were a predictable mix of thinly veiled condescension and outright criticism. A fellow developer cornered her at a charity gala, remarking that it was a brave but foolish endeavor to get involved with that sort of people. Others whispered that it was a bizarre publicity stunt, an eccentric whim of a reclusive millionaire. Each comment, each raised eyebrow, served only to reinforce the profound isolation she had always felt. But instead of making her retreat, it solidified her resolve. She would not let their cynical, insulated worldview dictate her actions. This fight was now as much against their indifference as it was for Claire's home. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor found herself drawn to the small hotel suite. Her visits becoming more frequent and less formal, she would bring books for the children or simply sit and have coffee with Claire. In these quiet moments, the barriers between them began to dissolve. Claire spoke of her husband, her memories painting a portrait of a simple but profound love. In return, Eleanor found herself sharing small, guarded pieces of her own story, the crushing silence of her large, empty house after her parents died, the loneliness of a childhood spent in boardrooms and with tutors. They were two women from vastly different worlds, yet they found common ground in the shared language of loss. It's in these moments of connection that you realize you're not alone in your struggles, and that shared understanding is a powerful thing. If you find strength in these connections, consider subscribing to our channel. The legal battle became a grueling war of attrition. The brothers-in-law's lawyers buried Eleanor's team in paperwork, filing motion after motion to delay the proceedings and drain resources. Depositions were brutal, with Claire forced to endure hours of cruel, invasive questioning designed to break her spirit. Eleanor attended every session, sitting silently at the back of the room, her presence a steady, unyielding show of support. She saw the system for what it was, a cold, impersonal machine that could be easily manipulated by those with money and a lack of conscience. This wasn't the clean, strategic warfare of corporate takeovers. It was a messy, ugly, and deeply personal fight for one family's dignity, and Eleanor felt every blow as if it were her own. The turning point came on a cold, rainy night a month into the legal fight. Eleanor received a frantic call from Claire. Mia's temperature had spiked dangerously high, and she was having trouble breathing. The constant stress, poor nutrition on the streets, and emotional trauma had finally manifested physically. Without a second thought, Eleanor drove to the hotel herself and rushed them to the best private hospital in the city. She spent the entire night in the sterile, quiet hospital room, watching the small child hooked up to monitors. She saw the raw, primal fear in Claire's eyes, the look of a mother terrified of losing her child. In that moment, all of Eleanor's remaining detachment shattered. This was no longer a case to be won or a charity project to be managed. This was her family, and she would burn the world down to protect them. The courtroom was cold, its sterile wood paneling and fluorescent lights seeming to absorb all warmth and hope. The opposing counsel had just finished his closing argument, a venomous tapestry of lies that painted Claire as a reckless, unstable spendthrift. He spoke of fabricated debts and feigned concern, his words designed to strip her of her dignity along with her home. Eleanor watched the two brothers-in-law, their faces smug and confident, certain of their victory. The judge's expression was unreadable, a mask of professional neutrality that offered no comfort. Claire sat beside her, trembling, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. In that moment, the cold fury that had been simmering inside Eleanor for weeks finally cooled into a diamond-hard resolve. This was not about winning a legal case anymore. It was about reclaiming a soul from the predators who sought to devour it. The judge turned his gaze to Claire. "Mrs. Evans, do you have anything you wish to say?" he asked, his tone flat, almost a formality. Claire stood on unsteady legs, a single sheet of notes shaking in her hand, which she promptly ignored. Her voice was barely a whisper at first, but it grew stronger as she spoke not of legal arguments, but of life. She described the worn spot on the living room floor where her husband would rock their children to sleep. She spoke of the small garden in the backyard, where every flower was a memory, a testament to a love that death could not erase. She talked about the pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe, charting the growth of her children, a sacred timeline of their family's existence. She wasn't pleading for a piece of property, she was fighting for the heart of her family. Claire's testimony filled the silent courtroom, a powerful testament to love and memory that hung in the air long after she sat down. It was in that moment, listening to a mother defend her sanctuary, that the last of Eleanor's emotional armor finally shattered. She saw not just Claire's pain, but the ghost of her own. A lonely girl lost in a world of legal documents and hollow condolences. The judge was about to render his verdict when Eleanor rose, her quiet movement drawing every eye. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but resonant, "may I address the court?" It wasn't a demand, but a plea born of a newfound understanding. It's incredible how one person's bravery can give you the strength to find your own voice. If you believe in the power of speaking up, subscribing helps us share more stories like this one. Standing before the court, Eleanor Vance was no longer the intimidating titan of real estate. She was simply a woman who understood loss. She spoke of her own past, not with self-pity, but with a raw honesty that silenced the room. She described the profound emptiness of a large house after her parents were gone, the disorienting cruelty of a world that saw her as an inheritance to be managed rather than a child to be comforted. She drew a direct line from the calculated avarice of Claire's brothers-in-law to the systemic indifference that preys on the vulnerable. "For years, I built walls of wealth around myself, believing they would keep me safe," she confessed, her voice thick with unshed tears. "But all they did was imprison me. Money builds empires," she declared, her eyes meeting the judge's, "but only dignity builds a home." They didn't just take her property, they tried to steal her family's soul. A heavy, profound stillness descended upon the room. The slick arguments of the opposing counsel seemed to evaporate, exposed as the hollow legal maneuvering they were. The brothers-in-law could not meet anyone's gaze, their greed suddenly looking pathetic and small in the face of such genuine human connection. The judge, a man accustomed to the cold facts of law, looked from Eleanor to Claire, his face softened with an empathy that transcended the bench. He cleared his throat, his decision clear. He ruled swiftly and unequivocally in Claire's favor, his words not just a legal judgment but a moral affirmation. As Claire collapsed into sobs of overwhelming relief, Eleanor wrapped her arms around her. The victory was not the gavel's fall, but the quiet, powerful embrace of two women who had found family in the ruins of betrayal. The weeks that followed were a quiet testament to their shared victory. Claire and her children returned to their home, not with a triumphant fanfare, but with a sacred, hushed reverence. The air inside was stale, a ghost of their old life, but as Claire opened the windows, letting in the crisp afternoon light, it was as if the house itself took a deep, cleansing breath. The children, Leo and Mia, rediscovered their rooms with shouts of joy, their laughter echoing through the halls and erasing the silence of the past few months. Eleanor was there, standing quietly in the doorway, a silent witness to their homecoming. She wasn't a benefactor or a client. She was simply Eleanor, a fixed point in their new universe, watching as the pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe were once again measured against two growing children. The house was no longer just a structure of wood and nails. It was a sanctuary reclaimed, a testament to resilience. A month later, Claire invited Eleanor for dinner. There was no pretense of luxury, just a simple home-cooked meal served at the small kitchen table where her family had shared hundreds of meals before. The food was humble, but the atmosphere was rich with a warmth Eleanor had never known. After the children were tucked into bed, Claire handed her a small, inexpensive photo album. The first page held a grainy, pixelated image printed from a security camera feed, showing a woman in a power suit crouching on a cold sidewalk, offering a bag of pastries to two small, frightened children. The following pages were filled with life, the garden being replanted, the living room being painted, the children laughing in the backyard. On the very last page was a recent photo of the four of them, taken by a neighbor. Their smiles bright and genuine. Beneath it, in Claire's neat handwriting, were the words, "To the founder of our new family." The experience had irrevocably altered the architecture of Eleanor's world. The cold, logical pursuit of wealth now seemed like a hollow echo of a life she no longer wanted. She saw the world not as a series of transactions, but as a web of human stories, many of which were silenced by injustice. With a clarity of purpose she had never felt before, she used her vast resources to establish the Vance Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing free legal and social support for women and families who had been preyed upon by the system. She didn't want a boardroom full of executives. She wanted people with heart. Its first director of outreach, a position created specifically for her, was Claire Evans, whose empathy and first-hand experience made her the perfect person to connect with those who felt they had no voice left. Eleanor Vance discovered that true wealth was not measured in square footage or stock portfolios, but in the sound of children's laughter echoing through her once silent penthouse on a Sunday afternoon. Her life was no longer a fortress, but a bridge, connecting her past pain to a future of shared purpose. She had not simply saved a family, they had saved her, filling the empty spaces in her life with an unconditional love she never thought possible. Her journey proved that empathy is not a weakness, but the most powerful currency in the world, capable of building a legacy far more enduring than any skyscraper. It's a reminder that every act of connection can start a ripple of hope. And by subscribing, you help us ensure these powerful stories of change continue to be told, inspiring others to build their own bridges.